Hi there, future teacher. Today we will be going through our comprehensive study guide for the Praxis 5018 exam. Let's get started. We're going to begin with the first major section of this exam, all about reading and language arts. Now, the purpose of this presentation is to provide you with everything that you need to know for the reading and language arts section. Also to note, this presentation is built specifically for the Praxis 5018 exam and follows every single exam competency listed in the official Praxis study companion. So this is your all-inclusive one-stop shop to learn everything that you need in one place, all about the reading and language arts section of this test. So let's get started. Now, within the reading and language arts section, our first focus is going to be the foundational skills. So first and foremost, let's talk about the role of phonological awareness. If it's been a while, understand that this is a crucial section or importance of the foundational skill of reading, and that's because phonological awareness is the ability to recognize and work with the sound structures of spoken language. Remember that it is absolutely critical. It's a critical skill for literacy because it forms the basis of understanding the alphabetic principle, which, in case you may have forgotten what that is, it's the idea that letters represent sounds. So students with a strong phonological awareness can better connect sounds to letters, which is key for reading and spelling. So remember, this skill is purely auditory. You can even see the word phone, or almost there without the E, P-H-O-N, and then E, right? So it's phone, it's all auditory or sound. This means if on exam day you receive a question all about phonological awareness and there's an answer option A, B, C, or D about writing, skip that and look for something about the sound. All right, let's keep going. Now let's go ahead and define some of the key terms that you'll want to know for your exam. As you can see, a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. It's like the k, a, and t sounds individually that make up cat. Now remember, a syllable is a unit of pronunciation with one vowel sound, whereas an onset is the initial consonant sound, and then the rhyme is the vowel that follows it. So for example here, if we take a look at the word sun, the onset would be that s, the S sound, whereas the rhyme would be that vowel and then consonant, that UN, un. Now remember that we can manipulate these sounds in several ways. And you're going to want to be familiar with blending, segmenting, substituting, and deleting for your exam. So let's go over these each. Now remember that blending is combining sounds to make a word by saying b, a, t, and then the student might say bat because they blended those sounds. Whereas segmenting, that's the opposite. This is breaking words or segmenting or separating their sounds. All right, so if I said sun, then the student would say s, n, right? Now let's go on to substituting, and that means changing a sound, like changing the k in cat to the H to hat. So going from one letter to another, for example, cat to hat. And then deleting right here at the bottom is removing a sound. It's deleting a sound. And that would be like taking the S out of steak in order to get a word like take. All right, so you're just deleting. Now let's keep this going and let's talk about the role of phonics and word analysis in literary development. All right, so this is all about word analysis and a really important section of this part of your exam. Remember that phonics is the understanding of the relationship between sounds or phonemes, as well as letters that represent them, or these are called graphemes, because remember, these are the letters, the graphemes. So word analysis builds on this by teaching students to break words into their smallest units of meaning. Here we can think of prefixes and suffixes, right? These skills are absolutely essential for decoding and spelling, and then in turn, these skills build up to fluency, which builds up to comprehension. All right, so here are some common letter sound correspondences and their spelling conventions. Here we have the rules. Remember, these can be difficult for students to learn, and that's why we need to teach them directly and explicitly. If we have a look at, for example, the hard and soft C, like in city, and G, like in gate, right? And then we have short vowels. We have long vowels. Remember, long vowels make the sound that the actual vowel is. So in boat, you can actually hear the O, but-o, right? A, rain, right? All right, and understand that vowel digraphs, these are two vowels together that make one sound. Again, if we take a look at the EA in bread, the E and the A, although two letters, make one sound, right? The I in train make one sound, train. All right, so then we have consonant digraphs, and these are two consonants that make a single new sound, right? If we take a look at a word like sheep, the SH come together. These are two consonants, but they make a single sound, sh, ch, right? All right, now let's go on to consonant blends. These are two or three consonants that appear together, but each retains its own sound. So if we take a look at the BL, for example, even though these are two letters and two consonants, you can still hear both of their letters. So bull, like in the word blend, right? Or great, street. You actually hear the st, right? It's not like these two, which actually form a single new sound. And then we also have R-controlled vowels. These are vowels formed by an R, where the R changes the vowel sound. Think here in car or bird or any of these other examples. Let's keep it going. All right, so it's important to distinguish between decodable words and high-frequency sight words. And your exam will likely present you with a question that will ask you to demonstrate your ability on this. So let's take a look here. Now remember that decodable words follow phonics rules and can be sounded out. They're actually words that are decodable, whereas high-frequency sight words these are very common words that students and young learners see all the time. However, they need to learn them by memorization in order to read them automatically. So some of these are irregular. Here we have words like the, was, and of. And then down here, we can also see the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade, different and also common sight words for these grade levels. So if on exam day you receive a question that asks you, for example, some, teacher in a scenario-based multiple choice question is presenting these particular words, and the question, the answer options ask you, would this be best for first grade, second grade, third grade? You'll understand the correct grade to select. So make sure you pause the video and look closely into the common sight words per each grade level. Let's move on now and take a look at roots and affixes. So remember, an affix can be a prefix that goes in the beginning or a suffix that goes at the end. So if we're looking at a prefix, we can see an example here. The prefix is un, that means not. So with unhappy, that means not happy. And whereas if we go to a suffix such as full, we can use the word, for an example, beautiful, and that literally means full of beauty. And then down below, we have the root word, such as port, and in the word transport, port, it means to carry. So we can see that we have the root words that help us decipher the meanings. Moving on, when we are specifically working with English language learners, and your exam will absolutely ask you about English language learners. So this section is going to be really important. Now, it's also helpful to understand the stages of language acquisition. Now, this framework that's outlined, here we have 5 different stages. Where the first one is entering, and this is where a student has very few words. We move on to beginning or emerging, and then we also have developing, expanding, and then bridging. And at this point, the student can work with grade level material with minimal language support and can function at the same level, even as native English speaking peers. All right, so understand the language acquisition. Here we go. Now, for English language learners, remember that certain phonics and word recognition approaches are particularly effective. So, if on test day you're asked, what is the most effective instructional strategy to help a certain type of student who has, a particular reading need, whether that's fluency or comprehension or word awareness or book handling skills, etc., and so forth, you're going to want to know that explicit instruction. So let's just go over the high overview here, because we can recall that all instruction in our classroom is best done when it's direct and it's explicit. So we are directly teaching the lesson that we want our students to learn. And if they are an English language learner, we might do something like capitalize on their L1. So if, for example, they're a native Spanish speaker, then some of the words in Spanish, they might not be exactly the same as English, but they're so similar that the student might recognize or be able to read or comprehend, whether that's reading comprehension or listening comprehension, faster, so we can tap into their native language in order to build off their background knowledge of what they already know into the helping them build their English skills. So again, we're going to want to connect to their L1, and this is called leveraging cognates. And also, if you receive a question on test day about English language learners, always look for an answer option that might include using pictures or gestures. Also, realia, you can think about this, that these, if you're actually teaching like the vegetables, it's really nice to say, this is a carrot. You actually bring in either real vegetables. I mean, that's the best, that's realia. But if you can't, bring in, the real vegetables, pictures are great too. All right, so oral language development, we want to engage our students in frequent oral practice through songs and chants and structured conversations. All of these help engage students in the classroom. Let's move on here. Here we have the understanding of the 6 common syllable patterns. Pause the video here to make sure and have a close look at the different syllable types, whether we're talking about closed, open, or the others. Understand the descriptions so that you can recognize the correct answer option on test day so that you can pick the right answer. And then we also have some of the examples. So when we're talking about different syllable types, the most common are closed versus open. So we can think of a closed as having a syllable that ends in a consonant. Let's take a look at some examples like rabbit or napkin. Now with the open, the actual words might also end in a consonant, such as tiger or robot, but the syllable ends in a vowel. Here we can think the tiger, it opens up. Robot, it opens up. All right, let's keep this moving on. Now let's shift our focus onto fluency for literacy development. Fluency, recall, is the ability to read text accurately, with the right speed and the right intonation, or what we call as prosody. So it's composed of the 3 key elements. Again, accuracy, rate, and prosody. This is a key fundamental understanding for your exam. So regarding fluency, you will more than likely receive a test question asking why fluency is so important. And that's because fluency is known to be in reading as the bridge between decoding and understanding that which was read, which we call comprehension. So when a reader is reading fluently, they're just reading all of the words, they know how to pronounce them, they are not focused on sounding out the words, and this frees up their mental space in order to capture what the text actually means. If a student is too focused reading word by word, you will oftentimes see a correlation that the students have a difficult time understanding that which was read. So if a student's reading word by word and it's taking them a long time to read a page, and then you ask them, can you tell me in your own words what you just read? They have a challenging time. But if the student can read fluently, then they can focus on picking up all of the information that the words provided to them on the text. All right, so next up, let's move to our next major section, and this is reading, literature, and informational text. So on test day, you're going to be presented with questions about two different styles of text. The first one is literature. Remember, that's fiction. And the second one is informational, and that's nonfiction. Another way that on your exam, informational texts might be presented, it's called expository text. So if you see expository, remember that's informational. And informational, we oftentimes see in, for example, like textbooks. All right. So let's keep this lesson going. When we are teaching our students to comprehend texts, remember, it's important for us to focus our lesson and our teaching on the key ideas and their details. So let's start with how this applies in literature first. So with the literature or the literary text right here, the literary text right here, we are going to want to engage our students, both giving them scaffolds, worksheets, graphic organizers, and then just teaching them the skills of picking out the key details, as well as the moral of the story, and then the theme too. All right, now let's move on to an example. So pause the video here, read the example text, and then you'll notice that the key details, the moral, and the theme are all presented below. Now, the reason I added this to our presentation is that on exam day, you will likely receive text passages that actually check whether you can pick out the key details, the moral, or the theme of the story. So again, make sure you are able to do that. Pause the video here to read this text, and then in your own words, state the key details, the moral, and the theme. All right, now let's keep this going. So here we're going to switch to informational texts right here. All right, now what we're going to be doing when we're teaching informational texts and what your exam is going to be asking about regarding expository texts is about the central idea and the key details. Now, for informational texts, we can think of statistics as being a vital part, statistics and facts of the informational text that we read. So one more time, again, pause the video here, read this informational text, and then see if you would be able to also identify the central idea and the key details. When we're working with expository text or informational texts, we're going to want to teach our students, and your exam is going to check that you know that we need to be teaching our students to pick out evidence from the text in order to support their claims or their thesis, their hypothesis. All right, so let's keep it going. Now, a key skill here is all about making inferences. And as we can see on your exam, they want you to be able to present, if you're given a text passage, if you're given a text passage, to be able to find the inferences from that passage using evidence. So to do that, we need to remember that an inference is an educated guess based on evidence from the text that we read combined with your own background knowledge. All right. So this is different. Inference is different than a literal comprehension checking question where the actual information was in the text. Whereas in inference, you need to infer and use what you read in order to make that educated guess to answer the question. Summarizing is another vital skill. And remember, a summary is a brief statement of a text's main points. And what it should do is include the central idea as well as the most important supporting details while leaving out minor information. And you can see here on a longer text an example. So if we have a text, here is the summary. Again, make sure to pause the video and actually do the work of reading the text and then confirming if your summary would have fit. All right, let's keep this moving on. So now let's go ahead and review the core elements of a literary text. So we have character, setting, and plot. And again, down below, we have an example text. And I made this because you will likely be asked to identify the character, the setting, and the plot. Moving on, the informational text that we are going to be using in our classroom, we're going to be teaching and also asking our students to analyze relationships among individuals in the story, events that happen in the story, and the ideas that take place in the story. And this often means identifying cause and effect in the text that we have down below. It's about Rosa Parks. And so if you receive a question on exam day, you can pick, you should be able to pick out whether it's cause and effect or chronological or which type of text structure. And we will get into the different types of text structure later in this presentation. Now it's time to discuss how the features and structures of different texts affect comprehension. So let's start with poetry. In poetry, remember that a rhyme and a meter are key features. The rhyme is the repetition of similar sounds, usually at the end of lines like star and R, whereas meter is the rhythmic structure of a line. Think like a pattern of stressed or unstressed syllables. So the twinkle twinkle example right here shows a simple meter with a stressed and unstressed pattern. All right, moving on. Now, going back to informational texts, again, here we have our different or various organizational structures, including cause and effect, problem and solution, chronological order, and compare and contrast. Take a moment to read the differences and make sure that you are going to be able to pick out which is which if you are given a text sample on your exam and it asks which text structure is this, you're going to be able to pick that out. Next up, this brings us to our third section, all about writing. And there are three common types of writing that we teach in elementary school. Two of the main types, this is opinion or argument writing, which aims to persuade the writer. Then we also have the informative or explanatory writing, and this provides facts and opinions and facts and explains concepts. And then next up, the third type is the narrative writing, which tells a story. Now, each writing type has various subgenres that we're going to need to know for the exam. For example, a speech can be informative or persuasive and include a clear introduction, body, and conclusion, whereas an advertisement is going to be persuasive in nature. It's going to use slogans and visuals. And then a narrative, such as a poem, might tell a story. Again, be aware of the different components that each have in case you are given a question that a teacher in a scenario-based question provides the students with an assignment that they need to create a catchy slogan with appealing visuals and to use persuasive language. You will know that this is an advertisement. All right. Moving on to the characteristics of effective writing. So remember, the exam competency is going to require you to understand the task and purpose, audience, and then also to match the correct text type. So if on test day you are provided with a teacher giving his or her student a task to convince the principal to allow for longer recess, that would be a persuasive letter. Whereas if the students are researching to explain a topic, that would be a research report. If they are trying to tell a funny story about a family vacation, that's a personal narrative. And if the teacher assigns a topic in order to describe how to build something that's like step by step, you should be looking for something like an instructional manual. Again, this would be that informative or expository type of text. Next up, we are going to be talking about the writing process. And this writing process consists of 5 steps. It begins with pre-writing, which is the planning phase. It moves next to drafting, where ideas are put on paper. And then it goes to revising, where we improve the content and organization. After that, we have editing, where we correct grammar and spelling errors. And then the final step is publishing, where the work is shared with the audience. Now, the way that you might see this on exam day is if you receive a question where the students are working to correct errors in grammar, spelling, and punctuation, and it asks, which is the most appropriate stage of the writing process, you would know to choose editing, for example. Okay, let's keep this going. Students progress through several developmental stages of writing, and you're definitely going to want to need to know these, not only the actual stage name, but the approximate age. And again, similar to our last slide, the way that this is often presented in your exam will be a description of a student doing a certain type of common writing developmental stage, or writing in a certain way, and then it's going to be your job to be able to identify that stage of writing. So take a moment here to pause the video and make sure that you have a good grasp of the presentation information that's on the screen right now. Also, at any time you want more time with these, remember that all of this information is actually built into our study guide, where you can have more time with the same information. All right, now let's keep moving on. Today we have lots of digital tools for writing, and our digital lives are, we're spending more and more time with computers and tablets and all of the digital devices. So it's also an important part about teaching writing in the classroom. So we have different word processors, whether that's, Google Docs, Microsoft Word, ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, just so many these days, right? And then, blogging is not exactly a thing of the past, but blogging has transformed. And, even though it's transformed, it's still, really important, especially one of the main parts about your exam that it's going to ask about is the importance of using digital devices for writing. And that, of course, which I think is in a slide coming up right here, it's the advantage of digital tools, and that is it's the power of interaction and collaboration. So if on test day you receive a question about why we need to or ought to be sometimes using the digital devices to showcase, to publish the works of our writing, the answer will more than likely come from an answer option that shows that we can motivate students to produce their best work by sharing it with people in different classrooms, different countries, all over the world. So next up, let's outline the research process. We've talked about the different stages of writing, we've talked about the writing process, and now we're going to move on to the research process. Now, your exam specification has asked you to get prepared to be able to identify each step in the writing process. So we don't know which you'll get on test day, but you should be pretty confident that you'll receive a question about at least one of these. So again, make sure that you have a grasp for each of these 7 steps. Now, with the writing process, we begin by asking a question. We start to gather resources, locate information. Once we have the information, we start to take our own notes. We synthesize and organize our notes, and then we start to actually write the research paper. And this is our drafting stage. Remember that it's always important to teach our students how to cite sources. And then once they have perhaps their first version of their draft completed, they've included their citations, then we'll teach them also how to revise and edit this as well. Now, in research, we will be using different types of sources. Some will be primary sources, and for your exam, you need to know that a primary source is a first-hand account or its original material, whereas a secondary source analyzes a primary source, but it was created after the event occurred. Now, also, it's going to be vital to be able to distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources. So let's just take a look and recall that reliable sources, these are trustworthy and accurate, and they often come from an expert in the field. Whereas unreliable sources may contain errors or biases, and we need to know how to teach the difference for our children. So, in order to do that, we will also be asked on exam day to be able to demonstrate our ability to differentiate between paraphrasing and plagiarizing, where we understand that paraphrasing is restating someone else's ideas in our own words and in our own sentence structure, whereas plagiarizing is just using someone else's exact words without giving them any credit. So, how do we know how to locate and cite sources? This is one of the exam competencies for the Praxis 5018 exam. So what we want to do is teach our students to use the proper resources such as local or even online but school library databases, and also teach them the difference between the different extensions .edu and .gov, whereas for example like .co or .io, these mean something differently. And we do want to use the digital versions, but we also need to teach them how to find the print versions too. All right, and we have talked about citing sources, so let's keep this moving. On to our next section, all about language. So we're going to start this section with our conventions of standard English, specifically the function of different word parts and parts of speech. So here we have a list of the 8 different parts of speech. So we have nouns, which are names and things, and we have pronouns, and these replace nouns. We have verbs that show an action, an adjective, these describe nouns, an adverb, and these describe verbs. We have a preposition, these show the relationship. You can think in, on, under, over, next to, between. And then we have conjunctions, these are connecting words. And then finally we have interjections, and these express emotion. So next up, let's go into a section about common errors that our students will often accidentally create or use. And as the professional teacher, like you and I, it's our job to be ready with the effective instructional strategies to help them combat these common errors. So word usage, for example, the dogs runs in the park, wherein the correct version would be the dogs run in the park. We also have mechanical errors that you could see on test day. Here we have a punctuation. This is a comma splice. I like pizza, comma, it is my favorite food. So you're going to want to be able to fix these common errors. I like pizza is a sentence on its own, so it should be a period and then a capital I. It could also be a semicolon. So here we have I like pizza, period, it is my favorite food. Or I like pizza, comma, oh, that's true. We could add a comma and then a connector right here, like and. Next up, we have spelling errors. So you might have words that sound the same. They're going to the store. That's incorrect. They're going because it's actually they are going to the store. And then also common spelling errors. I saw 3 deers in the forest, whereas in English, not all rules stay the same for all words, and we know that. But because we know this, we can, pre-teach the most important letters, words, phrases, especially to people who might need it the most, such as English language learners. All right, let's keep this going. And next up, we will review the 4 main sentence types on structure. Here we have a simple sentence, which has 1 independent clause. Also know that a compound sentence has 2 or more independent clauses that are joined by a conjunction, which in this case is that comma and then the but. Next up, we have a complex sentence, which has 1 independent and at least 1 dependent clause. And then a compound complex sentence has at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. All right, moving on. Authors often use different varieties of English. Think here like different dialects, whether, which part of the country or world that you're in. And a character's dialect or regional way of speaking can oftentimes reveal their background. So when teaching students about the parts of literary analysis, we might teach them that, for example, a character would use, a formal way of speaking in some common, events or something that's happening to them in the story, and then informal would be appropriate for other times, such as speaking with friends. And we can teach our students these. All right, so here we have an example, a mini lesson on grammar and mechanics. And so we can take a look at this right here. Here we have a sentence. An example, incorrect sentence, my friend and me goes to the park, right? So we're going to want to be able to correct present. We're going to want to correct simple sentences like this. And then we have writing and reading. Students copy the sentence and try to correct it independently. They are applying their knowledge of mechanics and usage. All right, so speaking and listening. Here, students share their corrections and explain why they may have done something or why a character may have done something, right? And to review and correct. And anytime on exam day that you see an answer option where the teacher provides the student with individualized feedback, always look closer at that, because oftentimes that will be the correct response. All right, moving on. Here we are looking at how to determine how to determine the meanings of words, or for us, how to teach how to determine the meaning of words so that students can independently discover the meanings of new words that they come across. So we're going to be using different structures, different strategies, and if on exam day you receive an answer option where you see use context clues, use syntax, or use morphology, such as the roots and affixes, which we talked about before, like unhappy and beautiful, or in this case, unbelievable, like I'm able to believe that, it's not believable, right? And we can teach our students that when you come across a word like unbelievable, you can look at the root word and you can say, oh, I know what believe means. And if it's believable, that means I can believe it. Yet I know unhappy, and unhappy means not happy. So unbelievable probably means not able to believe in it, right? And so we can teach our students, and your exam administrators are going to want you to demonstrate your ability to understand context clues. For example, when students read a sentence and they come across a word that they have never seen before, what they can do is they can read next to, the left and the right and above and below in order to understand the meaning of this new word so that they don't get stuck, so that they don't spend too much time looking in the dictionary, for example. Again, syntax is all about the way or the structure that the sentence is written, which can be helpful, and then morphology is using the affixes and roots. Let's keep this going. Here we have a table of common types of figurative language and their definitions. So your exam will likely provide you with a question. We don't know whether it's going to be simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, onomatopoeia. alliteration, or idiom, but more than likely, it's at least going to be one of these. So pause the video here to read the definitions and the example of each. Let's keep this lesson going. Here we can categorize vocabulary into 3 different tiers. Again, your exam will certainly ask you about at least one tier. We can recall that tier 1 words, these are basic everyday words that we commonly use in conversations. This might be happy, run. And then in tier 3, and I'm not trying to skip over, I'll come back to tier 2, but in tier 3, these are low frequency, domain specific words. Think about the types of words that we almost only use in, for example, science, like photosynthesis, or in math, denominator, numerator. Now, we don't oftentimes use those words except in that domain-specific language, whereas Tier 2 is a sort of special place where these are high-frequency academic words, and we can use Tier 2 words, such as analyze and compare, in both everyday language as well as in tier 3, sort of like during the science lab times or during math or social studies times. And so tier 2 are extremely important for us to teach our students. Next up, let's talk about this section all about speaking and listening. Now, effective collaboration requires different techniques for different learners. Every learner in your classroom is individual, and your exam administrators will want you to adopt that principle if you haven't already. So this is sort of a if this, then that, then we can see down below. Now, here we have if the goal is to brainstorm ideas for a story. So when I created this, I made this like this, if this, then that, because oftentimes you will receive a question on your teacher certification exam that will ask if there is a teacher who wants to promote brainstorming ideas for a story and you're given a struggling reader, then what is the most effective instructional strategy for this? And so what I wanted to do is make this presentation extremely direct and just provide you with the answers. Now, it's your job to be listening actively so you have your pen and your paper out and you're taking notes. So if you are given a question on test day that the teacher is promoting brainstorming, they're having a lesson about brainstorming, you have a struggling reader, what I recommend is to look for an answer option that has a technique, something like a round robin strategy, where each student offers one idea at a time without any pressure, and everyone, if they don't have an answer, they can say pass, all right? Now, if you're provided a question about an English language learner, then what you're going to want to do is offer them a scaffold, a sentence starter, such as, instead of just asking them a comprehension checking question based off a text that they have just read, that might be too open for them. And so what we can do is we can offer them structure, like write this on the board. As the teacher, I would write this on the board. I think the story should have, and then the English language learner, and of course, all of these techniques are good for everyone, but some students need it more than others. So the student would say, oh, okay, now I have a better understanding. I think the story should have, and then they can more than likely fill in the blank with something, just their best try, right? Now, if you have an advanced learner, and I remember when I was taking my reading portion of my teacher certification exam, I received a question about an advanced learner, and I was shocked to receive that question. I thought it was only going to be struggling readers and English language learners, so make sure you're prepared for advanced learners. Again, we have detailed information in our study guide, but for this presentation, let's remember that we can also, and what we want to do is challenge our advanced learners by connecting other concepts, ideas, or experiences that they already know about into more complex assignments. So what we want to do is we want to stretch their learning and see kind of how far they can go. All right, now, again, if you receive a question where you have a struggling reader and the goal is to discuss a chapter in a book, then what you might want to do is use think, pair, share. So if you, as the teacher, you're reading a book to the students, all the students are sitting on the rug in front of you, and you're using your teacher eye, you're sort of scanning the classroom, the class, all of the students, and you see some students kind of have like a puzzled look on their face. They know it's time for you to ask a question, and they sort of like look another way. Well, don't ask them, because then they feel embarrassed and then they don't want to participate in the future. But what you can do is you can model a think, pair, share, where you kind of put your, you kind of scratch your head, or you sort of, put your hand to your chin and you go, okay, I think this. And then you turn to a person sitting next to you and then you share it with them. And the great part about this for a struggling reader is they probably have an idea, but they just kind of want a confirmation with another learner. And as a teacher, we're never trying to trick our students. We're just trying to support them. And so with that confirmation of the student that they just turned and talked to, they would go, okay, good. I thought that too. But now I feel more confident with my answer. And then you can pick on them. And then when they answer it, correctly, you can, give them a confidence boost. Now, if you are discussing a chapter book and you have an English language learner, what you're absolutely going to want to do is you're going to want to pre-teach the vocabulary. So if you're, teaching a unit in science about dinosaurs, then what you're going to want to do is say, okay, here are the names of the common dinosaurs that we're going to be reading in the story today, and here are some terms that you may not have seen, and you actually write them on the whiteboard and you have a quick chat about them, and then you go ahead and actually read the story, and then they're all good. And for advanced learners, the key is almost always to do the same. Essentially, what you want to do is give them more complexity, not just more work, but really make it actually more challenging. All right, so next up, let's review the characteristics of active listening. This is an exam competency within your Praxis 5018 exam. So if you are reading, remember eye contact, nodding, being able to paraphrase, as well as summarize, asking clarifying questions. So, whether you're asking them or they're asking you, it shows that they're following along. They're being an active participant, and avoiding interruption. So remember, we let the speaker speak, and then when they're finished, then we can raise our hand or participate in the discussion. Moving on, finally, let's talk about oral presentations. And how do we make them engaging for our students? This is a key component, and so let's talk about it now. So we have these key elements. Volume. I can remember some students will, it's just their personality. They'll they'll present so gently, so softly, and we have to remind them that although, presenting is not normal speaking, it's a certain type of speaking, and when we're presenting, it shouldn't be too loud or too quiet. And there's a proper, speaking pattern, but a proper speaking volume. And then also articulation, where we need to avoid mumbling and present the words clearly. Pacing, again, not too fast, not too slow. Using that eye contact. A lot of people get really nervous their first couple of times presenting in front of crowds, and they might just look down or might look up. But this is something that we, again, directly and explicitly teach, that you want to connect with the people that you're giving the presentation to, and one of these ways to do so is by providing eye contact. Body language, you don't want to be slouched. You just want to have that confident posture. Awareness of audience. Remember, if it depends on if they are interviewing someone like a doctor or another teacher or a dentist. Sometimes we ask our students to interview either people in the home or interview people about their profession. How you would go about, and the language that you would use would be different than if you're interviewing a peer in the classroom. And then also visual aids. We want them to be nice, neat, not too cluttered, and have information on them, but not too much. And we can teach all of that. All right, so next up, let's go ahead and talk about the discussion areas. This is the conclusion, the wrap up. This is the review of the presentation information that I've just provided in this. In my opinion, this discussion area is the most important section, and these are where a lot of the questions on your Praxis 5018 actually come from. So although that first part was just information based, this now actually asks a question, and then I just directly and explicitly give you the answer. And this is really going to be the most valuable part in this presentation. So if you stuck around, I appreciate you, and you are just that much closer to passing. So let's go to this first question. What is the difference between a consonant digraph and a consonant blend? All right, so in this case, remember that a consonant blend is